Welcome to the Deep Fear channel. Watch closely, stay alert, and don't forget to subscribe. Story 1. The basement light never turns off. I never used to be scared of my father. He was strict, sure, quiet, old school, the kind of man who could fill a room just by breathing. But scared? Number. That started after my mom died. She passed on a stormy night 2 years ago. Heart attack, they said. She was only 48. I remember standing in the hallway outside their bedroom, listening to her gasping, the thunder rolling in through the windows, and Dad whispering something under his breath. Not, "Please don't die," or "Stay with me," but something low and guttural, like a prayer in a language I'd never heard before. When I ran in, she was already gone. Dad was sitting on the edge of the bed, head down, whispering still, and the lamp beside him flickered so violently I thought it would burst. He didn't look at me. He just said, "Go back to your room, son." I did, because somehow I couldn't move against his voice. After the funeral, Dad locked the basement door. He'd never cared about it before. It was just an unfinished space full of old boxes, tools, and his workbench. But one morning I found a heavy chain looped through the handle and a shiny new padlock hanging from it. "Why's it locked?" I asked. He looked up from the kitchen table. The circles under his eyes had deepened since Mom died. His skin hung loose, and his eyes looked too bright, feverish. "There are things down there that need to stay put," he said. "What things?" He smiled faintly. "Your mother's things." That shut me up. But at night, when I went to get a drink, I'd sometimes see the light from under the basement door, a weak, yellow glow flickering like candlelight. And once, I swore I heard someone crying down there. About a month later, a smell started seeping up through the vents. It was sickly sweet, like rotting fruit mixed with burnt hair. When I complained, Dad said he'd handle it. But the next morning, instead of being gone, it was stronger. I caught him at 3 a.m. carrying something heavy down the basement steps, something wrapped in black garbage bags. When he saw me in the hallway, he froze. For a second, I thought he'd hit me. Then his expression softened into that too wide smile again. "Just garbage," he said. "Go to bed." When he came back up, he was covered in dirt up to his elbows. I didn't ask where the garbage went. I couldn't. One night, I woke to the sound of whispering through the vent, the same one that always blew that strange smell. It wasn't Dad's voice. It was softer, female. "Help me," it said. "Please, Daniel." That was my mother's voice. I froze. Every instinct screamed that it couldn't be her, but there it was again, louder now, like she was pressing her mouth against the vent. "He won't let me go." I ran to Dad's room. His door was half open. He wasn't sleeping. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, facing the wall, the faint hum of chanting coming from him. On the wall in front of him were symbols drawn in chalk, glowing faintly red in the dark. I whispered, "Dad?" He stopped chanting, turned his head slightly, just enough that I could see one eye staring back. But it wasn't his eye anymore. It was completely black. "Go to bed, Daniel," he said, his voice flat. "You'll wake her." 2 weeks later, Dad left for work. Or so I thought. His truck was gone. And for once, the padlock on the basement door was missing. I knew it was a mistake, but curiosity had been eating at me. I went down. The first thing I noticed was that the light bulb wasn't electric. It was an oil lamp, flickering on a workbench surrounded by half-melted candles. The second thing was the drawings on the floor. Huge circles burned into the concrete, lines connecting crude symbols like a spider web. And in the middle of it all was a trapdoor I'd never seen before. It looked ancient, wood darkened with age, iron rings bolted to each corner, and something carved into the surface. She waits below. I heard footsteps behind me. Dad was standing on the stairs, covered in sweat, breathing hard. "Why are you down here?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "You shouldn't have seen this." "Dad, what is this? What are you doing?" He started crying then, slow, uneven sobs. "I tried to keep her," he said. "I thought I could make her stay." Before I could ask what he meant, the trapdoor rattled. Not a little vibration, a full, heavy shake like something underneath was pushing up. Dad screamed, "Stay back!" and ran to hold it shut. But whatever was under there was strong. The boards bulged and groaned under his hands. Then came the voice. Mom's voice again. "Danny, help me!" My father looked at me, his face twisted with agony. "It's not her!" "It's never her." The trapdoor burst open. For a moment, the room went completely dark. The lamps blew out. Then, from the hole, a pale hand reached up. The fingers were too long, the nails blackened and cracked. But the skin, God, the skin looked like my mother's. Dad was screaming prayers, slamming the trapdoor back down. But another arm came up, and then a head, hair matted, eyes wide open and gleaming white. "Daniel," it said in that perfect imitation of Mom's voice. "He killed me." I ran to grab Dad, but he shoved me back, yelling, "Stay away." The thing climbed out, slowly, twisting, its limbs bending wrong. When it stood, it was almost twice my mother's height. Her face hung loose, like it had been peeled off and stretched over something else. "Why did you leave me?" it whispered. Dad lunged at it with a knife from his belt. It didn't even flinch. It just caught his wrist and twisted until the bone snapped with a loud crack. Then it turned to me. "Danny," it said, its mouth splitting wider than humanly possible. "Come to Mommy." The lights exploded. I ran. I don't remember how I got out of the house. I just remember running through the woods barefoot, hearing two sets of footsteps behind me, one heavy and one dragging, like wet cloth over leaves. I hid in the old shed by Miller's Creek until morning. When the police found me, I told them everything. They searched the basement, but it was empty. No symbols, no trapdoor, no candles, and no Dad. They found his truck 3 miles away, crashed into a tree. The seat was empty, and the windshield was shattered from the inside out. The sheriff said maybe he wandered off in shock. Maybe the rest was just trauma-induced imagination. But I knew what I'd seen. That was 6 months ago. I've been living with my aunt since then. She's kind, but she doesn't talk about what happened. Sometimes, at night, she finds me sitting in front of the vent again, listening. Last night, I heard it again. "Danny," the voice whispered, "he's with me now, but he wants you." I froze. My aunt doesn't have a basement, but when I went downstairs this morning, there was a faint light coming from the closet door under the stairs. Yellow, flickering. And on the floor in front of it, written in ash, were the same words from that trapdoor. "She waits below." The police gave me back some of Dad's belongings this week. His tools, wallet, and a small video camera. There was one file on it, dated the night before he disappeared. In the video, he's sitting in the basement, sweating, eyes darting around. Behind him, something moves in the shadows. Dad, on video, "If you find this, Daniel, I did it for her." but she's not what she was. Don't go near the light. It's not a light. It's a door. He turns the camera to face the floor. The trapdoor is open. From the darkness below, a hand reaches out, slow and deliberate, and grips his ankle. The video cuts off. Story 2. Father's voice in the static. When I was 8, my dad taught me how to fix old radios. He said the air was full of lost voices, music, news, prayers that never really died. They just floated around, waiting for someone to tune them in. I thought that was poetic back then. Now, I think it was a warning. Because after he died, I still heard his voice. And it came through the static. Dad died last winter. Heart failure, they said, though no one was surprised. He'd been a heavy drinker, a night worker, and had that look in his eyes like he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. At his funeral, the pastor asked if anyone wanted to say a few words. I didn't. There were none. But as the casket was being lowered, the wind picked up, and for a moment I swore I heard radio noise. A faint hiss rising from nowhere, mixed with a whisper that sounded like, "Still here, Mark." I froze. My name. No one else reacted. The sound faded as quickly as it came. That night, I dreamed of his workshop, the shelves stacked with dusty transistors, the smell of solder and rust, and a voice crackling through an invisible speaker whispering, "Don't throw them away." A month after the funeral, I went back to his house to clean it out. Everything looked the same, except the radios. Dozens of them, all lined up on his bench, each one connected to another by loops of copper wire. It looked more like a web than a collection. I unplugged one at random, and the others hummed for a moment, like they were alive. Then I noticed something else. Each radio had a frequency written in black marker on its casing. Not numbers, but words. M-O-M. M-E. Home. Below. And one in the center, on a large wooden console, had Mark written across it. It was already on. Just static. Low, breathing static. When I turned the knob, I heard a voice. "Mark, can you hear me?" I dropped the knob. It was my father's voice. Weak, trembling, buried in distortion. But it was him. "Dad," I whispered. "Finally," he said, "I found the right channel." The voice came only when I was alone. If anyone else entered the room, the static went silent. I recorded it once on my phone, but when I played it back, it was just white noise. "You buried me wrong," he said one night. "What do you mean?" "They didn't put the sigil on the lid. I told them to mark it." "What sigil?" "The one that keeps the other voices out." That night, I dreamed of the coffin again. Only it wasn't in the ground. It was standing upright in the middle of his workshop. The lid pulsed like a heartbeat. When I told my aunt about the radio talking, she said I was grieving, that people hear things after trauma. Maybe she was right. But grief doesn't twist the dials by itself when you leave the room. I started testing the radios systematically. Everyone had a slightly different sound. Some hissed, some crackled. One even whispered in what sounded like Latin. But the Mark radio was different. Its static moved with my breathing. When I exhaled, the noise softened. When I held my breath, it grew sharp and hungry. I began to notice other things too. Footsteps upstairs. A shadow that didn't match my movement in the reflection of the window. And the smell. Burnt ozone, like a storm trapped inside the house. One night, I unplugged all the radios and took a hammer to the big one. The static screamed. Not metaphorically, it screamed. A deep, mechanical howl that shook the walls. The windows vibrated, the lights flickered, and from inside the shattered console, something crawled out. It looked like smoke at first, dense, oily, and alive. But as it spread across the room, it began to form a face. My father's face. "You shouldn't have broken the line," it hissed. I ran, but before I could reach the stairs, the house went pitch black. When I woke, I was in the basement. My hands were bound with copper wire, my back against the cold concrete wall. The radios were all down there now, connected into one massive loop, their dials glowing faintly red. My father's voice came through all of them at once. "You can't leave me, son." "Not again." "You're dead," I whispered. "You're not him." "I died, yes, but the frequency didn't. The body fails, the signal remains." The radios began cycling through stations on their own, voices blending into one another, men, women, screams, laughter, all merging into a single distorted chant. And then, through the wall of noise, came Mom's voice. "Mark, help me!" I froze. "Mom?" "He brought me here," she said. "He said he could save me." But he only opened the wrong door. The static flared again, and I saw movement behind the radios, shadows writhing, shifting, pressing against the concrete as if the wall itself was breathing. Dad's voice grew deeper. "Don't listen to her. She belongs to the interference. I can still fix this." I screamed until my throat bled. "You're not my father." "Then why do you still answer when I call your name?" I don't remember how I escaped. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and I was outside, lying on the front lawn, bleeding from my wrists. The house was silent. When I went back inside, all the radios were gone, every single one. In their place, etched into the wall above the workbench, were the words, "Tuned at last." The authorities said the house had been struck by lightning, electrical surge, fire hazard, but there was no burn damage, no evidence of any storm. They asked me if anyone else had been there. I told them no, but sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still feel the hum of static deep in my chest. That was 2 years ago. I moved across the country. New job, new apartment, no radios. I even stopped listening to music for a while. But last week, while driving home late, my car radio turned on by itself. No station, just static. Then, "Mark, long time." I threw the radio out the window. The static followed through my phone, through the speakers, through every electronic device I owned. Everywhere I go now, the signal finds me. TVS flicker, Bluetooth speakers hum when I enter the room, and sometimes I hear two voices now, my father's and my mother's, talking to each other through the static. "We're waiting for him to tune in." "No, I set up a recorder last night, left it running all night beside my bed. This morning, I played it back. For hours, just white noise. Then at 3:33 a.m., a whisper, "This is the Father." Broadcasting from below, "The frequency is ready. He just has to listen." And then, faintly, my own voice responding, "I'm listening." Story 3. The Feast of Sunday Night. When people talk about family traditions, they usually mean barbecues, game nights, or trips to the lake. Ours was different. Every Sunday night, after church, my father would cook dinner. Only one dish, always the same: roast meat stew, thick and dark, with a smell that filled the whole house like incense. We weren't allowed to ask where it came from. He'd just say, "The Lord provides." So we feast and he'd smile, a smile that never reached his eyes. My father was a preacher in a dying town in southern Ohio. He ran a small chapel with maybe 20 regulars, mostly old folks and widows. He said the world was ending and that the faithful would need to feed the fire within to survive. When I was 10, I thought that meant reading the Bible more. When I turned 16, I learned what he really meant. It was a cold Sunday in February. My mother had been gone for a week. Dad said she was visiting her sister, though I'd never met one. That night, during dinner, he ladled stew into my bowl and said, "Your mother's spirit will be with us tonight." The smell was stronger than usual, sweet, metallic. When I hesitated, he gripped my wrist so hard I dropped the spoon. "Eat," he said softly. "You must take her into you, so she doesn't leave us again." I stopped sleeping after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Mom, standing in the corner of my room, her mouth sewn shut, pointing toward the basement door. I tried to open it one morning after Dad left for church, but the handle wouldn't turn. It wasn't just locked, it was sealed from the outside, covered with strips of parchment, each marked with symbols drawn in blood. On the floor next to the door sat a wooden bowl filled with bones, small ones, too small to be from an animal. I told myself they were fake, but deep down I knew better. The next Sunday, Dad said we'd have company. "A fellow believer," he said. "He'll help us keep the tradition alive." That night, a man named Mr. Burke came for dinner. He was pale, jittery, wearing a black coat too big for his frame. He didn't touch his food, just stared into his bowl. Dad clasped his shoulder and said, "You'll taste the Lord's work soon." Halfway through the meal, the lights flickered. Burke looked up, terrified. "There's something in the basement," he whispered. Dad smiled. "There always is." Burke stood abruptly. "I can't do this," he said. "This isn't faith. It's madness." Dad's face darkened. He rose slowly from his chair, towering over the man. "Sit," he said. When Burke didn't, Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out a long silver key, the kind that looked ancient. He whispered a prayer under his breath. The air went cold. The house groaned. And from the basement, something knocked. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Burke froze. Dad turned to me. "Fetch another bowl, son." Burke never left the house that night. I heard the sounds after midnight. Thuds, dragging, muffled screams. When I crept down the stairs, the basement door was open for the first time. Light flickered from below, orange and pulsing like firelight. Dad was down there, shirtless, his body covered in black markings that looked burned into his skin. He was kneeling before a stone altar I'd never seen before. On it lay Mr. Burke, motionless. Dad was cutting into his chest, whispering scripture, except the words weren't English. They weren't even human. Something moved in the shadows behind him, something huge and formless, breathing heavily, its outlines shifting like smoke. When Dad turned, his eyes were pitch black. "Join me, son," he said, smiling that same dead smile. "The Lord is hungry." I ran. For weeks, I tried to act normal. I still went to school, still pretended to pray at dinner. But my father changed. He stopped preaching about salvation. Now his sermons were about consumption, about becoming one, with the flesh divine. People began disappearing in town, 2, then 4, then 7. The police questioned everyone, but no one dared point a finger at the preacher. The stew never ran out. And every Sunday, when I refused to eat, He'd just smile and say, "It's okay. You will soon." The hunger comes for us all. One night, I woke to the sound of the front door creaking open. Through my window, I saw Dad walking into the woods behind the church, carrying a lantern and dragging a burlap sack. Something inside the sack was moving. I followed him. The forest behind the church was black and silent. I hid behind the trees as he reached a clearing I'd never seen before, a ring of stones surrounding a deep pit. He dropped the sack and whispered, "Feast is ready." The thing inside the bag was alive, a man gagged and bleeding. Dad lifted his hands toward the sky. The ground began to shake, and from the pit, a sound came. Wet, heavy breathing, like lungs inhaling through water.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe.